Grimsby Chums were made up of volunteers from throughout the borough and district. Came from mainly from Grimsby and Cleethorpes, but a lot came from sort of surrounding areas in slightly sort of lesser numbers.
Basically, they were the young men of the town that was called up, sort of asked to volunteer for service on anywhere in the world, of course.
I went to La Bozelle, where the largest mine that was blown in the 1st of July 1916, and that was where I heard about the action of the Grimsby Chums, which are part of the Lincolnshire Regiment.
My name is Sandra Longdon, and my father was Henry John Tidder, known as Harry Tidder, and he was a member of the Grimsby Chums.
I'm Richard Bellamy. My uncle, one of my elder uncles, was Captain Charles Henry Bellamy of the Chums.
Gusney George True, telegram boy at the Grimsby Post Office, and all of the post boys, telegram boys who signed up, and there were an awful lot of them, they all joined this and they formed the Grimsby Chums.
From my point of view, what impressed me about Grimsby was, and I think this was applicable to every area in this country, when the call to arms went out for these people to volunteer, it was the best people in the community that left.
The idea for the Chums Battalion started at the Winteringham Grammar School, or the Municipal College as it was known, in Eleanor Street.
And in Grimsby there was a big influx of guys, a lot of them old grammar school boys from the Winteringham Grammar School as it was in those days.
They thought it would be a good idea to respond to Lord Kitchener's appeal for men, and their original intention was to join the 5th Battalion of the Lincolnshire Regiment.
Come. Close the door on your way out, Smedley. Captain, I've just received the telegram. From Mayor Tate himself, no less, bearing most fine news. Lord Kitchener has given word that men are needed in abundance. 100 ruddy thousand, which if I'm not much mistaken, and mark my words, I am never mistaken, this new regiment of ours is a go, full steam ahead, a battalion waiting to rise up on our very doorstep. My old boys, men of honour, each and every one of them, will be positively chomping at the bit. We can't have them missing out on all the fun, eh? Our Lincolnshire lads.
Telegraph boys, teachers, tram drivers, they all responded to this call to arms. And the first people that, in the case of Grimsby, I think it was 800, that joined what became the Grimsby Chums as a territorial regiment. These were the people that were really the finest people in the community.
The recruiting office was the artillery barracks down Victoria Street, which is where Gates Printers is. And some of the young men reported there for duty, and others were sworn in at the town hall. The response was overwhelming. Kitchener promised that if you joined up together, they would allocate you to serve together. And at that time they were just interested in getting the volunteers.
He signed up in 1914. He told a little story about his age. He said he'd been born in 1896 instead of 1897, so he was only 17. He signed up in the November, but then he was sent home, but he did go back in the January of 1915, and then he served then until 1919.
And he joined the post office and he moved up here to Grimsby, and he was telegram boy in Grimsby at the beginning of the war, and he joined up with Kitchener's call.
Charles was a personal assistant to Sir John Marsden of Consolidated Fisheries.
That was when the call to arms went right throughout this country, right through the whole of the country, to bring in the territorial movement, and it was formed by many areas such as the county of Lincolnshire, creating Pals regiments. And the Grimsby Chums were raised at that point.
But chum was a well-known phrase for a friend, and there were children's comics known as the Chums anyway, so it was a word in wide usage. But Lady Doughty has been given the label of the originator, and I've not seen any evidence to disprove that.
To the brave men of Grimsby, I do dedicate these impassioned words to you. Words that my pen have transcribed from my very heart. Words that I pray you take with you always, as you rise to do your duty, not only for your country, but for your town. When we heard they'd started fighting, well, we wanted to be in. So we formed a little corps among our chums. And we vowed we'd stick together, yes we would, through thick and thin, and together we would face whatever comes. For there's no one like a chum to have beside you in a fight. You can bet your boots he'll always play the game. So we all gripped our hands together, and our grips were pretty tight, though we heard the drills and lectures might be tame. So we're all chums, every mother's son of us. All chums, every bloomin' one of us. Can't you hear us gaily singing as we're marching down the street? Can't you hear the distance ringing with the echo of our feet? And we're school pals, and we're work pals, and there's some from office stools, and there's others haven't started biz as yet. But we're all chums together, and we're out to learn the rules, and we'll learn 'em. It's pretty slick, it's safe to bet. Though we only started drilling just a week or two ago, and there's some of us had never drilled before. We are shaping pretty well, we think, and so we'd have you know, when we're finished, well, we're ready for some more. For we're all chums, every blessed one of us. All chums, every mother's son of us. With the old flag waving o'er us, oh, it's proud we are today to have places in the chorus that are led by K of K. When we go across the ocean and come face to face with Bill, we will tell him what we think of him, not half, and we'll tell him in a language that is even hotter still than the pontoon knows, but this is only chaff. We've 3 words to say to Willie. What they are, I will not tell. When he understands, we'll point the nearest way. For we'll tell him very plainly that his proper place is, well, it's a place where whiskered sinners always stays. Now, come and be one of us. Kaiser Bill is bound to catch it when the chums get on your track. For we'll pack him off to Potsdam, and you'll never see him back.
Initially, they did the training locally. They got ex-Army NCOs who'd retired to come in to do the training.
They did a lot of square bashing on what was known as Clee Fields, which is the area on Weelsby Road where King George V playing fields are, and Weelsby Camp was in that area as well.
There used to be a big pavilion there which they used as a sort of headquarters, and they trained in there for a while, and they had no uniform, so they just trained in civilian clothes.
The Chums originally were going to join the 5th Lincolns, but by the time the Chums had got up to company strength, that's 250 men, the 5th Lincolns, the territorial battalion, were up to standard, and so the Chums decided to form their own battalion. But they got up to about 700, and then they ran out of local people. They recruited from the villages around Grimsby and further afield, like Lincoln, Skegness, Boston.
From Barrow, Barton, Scunthorpe. They could join the territorial army, of course, their local one, but for some reason or other they wanted to get off to war quick, so because some of the battalions were kept behind for home defence purposes, but they knew the Chums was going to France, so they all joined there.
They couldn't make up the numbers, and so about 150 Wakefield men joined the Chums, and they became D Company.
When the Grimsby Chums were sent to Brocklesby, there was a shortage of khaki at the time, as so many men were joining up nationally, and they had to make do with whatever they had available. And what was available was blue serge, which was in abundance for telegrams and post office workers. And the uniforms were made up in the military style using this blue serge, and they were known as the Kitchener Blue uniforms.
And eventually, whilst they were at Brocklesby, I think they gradually changed from the blue serge to the khaki as khaki became available.
Lord Yarborough had offered some of his land to be used for training purposes, and they went off to Brocklesby.
At ease, lads. Thank goodness you've stopped that incessant whistling.
Camp was built in Brocklesby in 1914, courtesy of Lord Yarborough, with whom the Chums had a great relationship for many, many years.
You off with me.
And that camp was paid for by the borough of Grimsby.
They spent the next year or so training, doing proper training there. They were able to dig trenches and do assault courses, weaponry, musketry, shooting, bayonet practice, all the things that a soldier does. Plus the drill and all the things that they use to hone the men into an efficient outfit.
The level of training grew and grew, if you like. They did basic training at Grimsby and Brocklesby, then higher level training at Ripon and at Strensall near York.
I've seen film of the guys marching down the roads around Brocklesby, and they're quite smart, just as good as a regular unit. Well, they all signed up 14, 15-ish. They didn't go to France until late 1915, so they were at Brocklesby for about a year, which should give them pretty good training by the time they went out.
Well, life at Brocklesby was quite an enriching experience for many of the men from Grimsby. They lived in wooden huts and took great pride in the camaraderie that was shared. And we can see this in a number of the photographs, that there are some quite individual photographs for each hut.
This one's on the house, boys. Cheers. Cheers.
How did you manage to...
A combination of my good looks and impending bravery, most likely.
Who was she?
She, my friend, be one Gwendolyn Pike. Quite the little corker, wouldn't you say?
I hope you can use that charm of yours on the Germans.
You just wait till those ladies catch sight of me in this uniform.
A tender kiss to send you on your way.
A kiss to sustain me these coming months. To take with me and cherish until I return. If we return today. At ease. That's the ticket, lad. Keep that chin of yours up. It'll stand you in good stead. I hear you're quite the cards these days, Tidder. Well, it's spirit like that which will win us this war. Ellis, boy, what's the matter with you?
Just my mother, sir. She worries about me. Always has. Can't stand the thought of me being so far away from home.
That'll soon change, once she receives word of our victory. And Bennett, what's the matter with you?
Nothing, sir. Ready to serve king and country and take care of the lands.
As it should be. Ellis, your mother will be coming along tomorrow, I assume, to see you off?
But of course, sir. She wouldn't miss it for all the tea in China. She even says she's bringing her handkerchief. It's got ducks on it.
It will be a day of celebration, not sorrow. I'll have a word with her. Set her fears aside.
What will you tell her, sir?
I'll tell her the truth, of course. That you're in safe hands. You're a young, strong, capable lad, Ellis, and the Grimsby Chums will look after each other. I'll drink to that, Captain.
What about your parents, Captain Bellamy?
Mother and father could not be any more proud.
My lot insist on me writing home every day without fail. No excuses. I promise to regale them with stories of rough and tumble, with life in the thick of it.
You're like a modern day Robinson Crusoe. I am going to miss this place. Mr. Barmaid, more like.
Hey! I worry about my brothers and sisters, sir. They look up to me.
Hey, I hear in France that they eat food that isn't even fish. That's a thought, eh, Bennett?
Aye, snails and frogs' legs away.
Ruddy Grimsby.
I will miss Grimsby though. That's all I've ever known, this old town.
You'll see it again, lads. We'll have you back home safe in no time.
Will we be back by Christmas?
You have my word.
Come on, boys, drink up, it's time.
They finished up at a place called Sutton's Venny near Warminster, which is on the edge of Salisbury Plain.
Do more advanced training, so the degree of training became more and more advanced. And by the time they went out to France in January 16, one of the chums told me that they were as hardy as the beasts in the field. You know, they were. Some people think Kitchener's men were amateurs, but by the time they went out to France, they were fully trained and they could hold their own with the regulars. It was January 1916, and the format at that time was you went into a quiet sector of the line to learn about what it was like to be under fire, if you like. So they went into trenches at a village called Erkingham.
The trench system was actually the way it went, 600 miles from the Channel Port all the way down to Switzerland. But most of the fighting took place in Picardy.
The thing was, they gradually became more used to trench life, and they had to learn to keep under cover because they started to suffer casualties. In the 6 months that they were in Armentières, they lost about 4 or 5 men each month. So they got to the Somme region in June 1916, gradually becoming more and more familiar with army life and the antagonism of the Germans, because if you weren't careful, German snipers would pick you off.
I'm missing home, lads. The smell of marmalade from Tickler's.
Tickler's jam.
I miss talking to the customers at the post office.
And I miss that pier. The salty sea air.
I miss the smell of fish.
Prior to the army going through into German lines, they sunk tunnels all the way under the lines.
Of course, the Germans have got all the high ground. They got there first, you see, so they pinched all the high ground. Because you're mining into a slope, so if you keep level, you get deeper and deeper and deeper. You don't have to go dig uphill either, so it was advantageous to us for mining purposes.
And these were placed at various points along the line. There's one at Hawthorne Ridge and others, smaller mines. And they blew these up, and then the army went forward.
The only whistle I expect to hear is the one signalling for our immediate advance. Better. Stop tapping.
What else am I going to do? 7 AM sharp, they said. What's going on?
The order will come.
Better bloody come soon. I've only got one woodbine left.
Here.
Thank you, Captain.
It's all right, Private.
I can't take much more of this. Twiddling our thumbs like brainless idiots.
Write a letter.
For a distraction.
Exactly. Why do you think I do it?
Do you fancy a round at cards?
I wrote a postcard to Aunt Martha. With love, A Company.
You're just afraid you'll lose.
She's getting married on Sunday. Bloke called Jack. I've never met him. I'm just wishing her well. Saying thanks for them gold flakes.
It won't do you any harm to send word home. Set your affairs in order, settle any outstanding debts, say goodbye.
You mean write home like everything's hunky-dory? Make out like we're having a whale of a time? Dear father, trench life is as fun as ever. My foot's gone black. I share my bed with rodents.
Ask him how his garden's coming along. Talk about the weather. That's what I do. I tell him stories. She's oblivious.
The whole world's oblivious.
Well, I only signed up because everyone else was. All them posters.
King and ruddy country. Ladies falling at your feet. If I ever meet Lord Kitchener, I'll tell him he can go
signed up because the rest of the post office workers signed up.
Good. And you, Bennett?
They said we'd be home by Christmas. What happened to that?
I wanted to set an example, to do my duty. It was my chance. It wasn't quite what I expected, I admit that.
I signed up because my father was in the Navy. Just made sense. I mean, what else was I going to do? And this was supposed to be the beginning, not the end.
They had an extra 150 yards to go because the generals knew that the hole would make a big bang. So to protect our troops, he held them back 150 yards before the actual start line.
Right lads, at 0400 hours, we're going to be moving back 150 yards to a safe position. I want a full kit check in 15 minutes.
Yes, Captain.
Let's move out. Okay, follow me.
It was out of sight of the Germans, so protected them from that point. But when they got up and started to walk forward, they had an extra 150 yards of open territory to move across.
So on the 1st of July, they detonated, I think it was 72,000 pounds of ammonal. Many of the soldiers recorded and said that the earth shimmered all around them like jelly. I mean, it was a massive, massive explosion.
Apparently the Germans had the legs broken by the shockwaves going through the ground.
They thought they were under the front line of the German opposition, but actually they were a little bit short.
The Grimsby Chums, the Lincolnshire Regiment, they were there. On the right-hand side was the Royal Scots, and the Ulster Regiment were on the left, as I remember.
So instead of going, say, 150 metres, they went 135 metres.
When it was blown, right above it, or nearly above it, was a very famous gentleman who was piloting an airplane called C.S. Lewis, and he was ordered to stay at about 3,000 feet to record approximately how high this explosion was going to take place. It went above him by 500 feet, nearly knocked his plane out of the sky, but he knew that the explosion had brought up the ground up to about 3,500 feet.
The sides were vertical. When it blew up, it didn't blow a nicely shaped, tapered hole, it was vertical.
It was a massive explosion, and apparently the sound could be heard in London. There's a gentleman called Mr. Richard Dunning. He purchased that area where the mine blew, and it's called the Loch Nagar crater. It's 300 foot wide by 80 feet deep. So many people visit it every year that we feel by 2016 500,000 people will be going round there.
So all of a sudden there's a huge, in effect a type of quarry I suppose, in the middle of their attacking position, so some of them would have had to squeeze round it somehow.
You ready, lads? For King Country and Grimsby.
The troops were told that they could walk across no man's land because the knowledge at the time was that the German front line would have been destroyed.
The Germans had perfected this enfilading fire where they fired at the sides, meeting inwards.
And as the Chums went over the top, the German machine gunners came out of their dugouts and attacked the advancing troops. The figure that I quote is derived from soldiers died in the Great War, and 160 Chums were killed on the 1st of July. Lots more were wounded and died of their wounds subsequently, but I think there's confusion between who was killed, who was wounded, and who was missing in action, and that number could be 500 for killed, wounded, missing in action.
We know why that battle took place. It was to relieve the French, but it was really the worst, I think, disaster the British Army had ever suffered. I mean, 60,000 casualties in one day. It's absolutely horrific. And for me, what is very, I think, emotional, is that many of the Grimsby Chums, their bodies lay there for 4 days. Now, back home here in Grimsby, the city fathers decided to show the training film in the Earl of Brockleby's estate of the men going through this action of moving forward into German lines. And all of the Grimsby people who were in these cinemas, and they were talking about their sons and fathers and what have you that were there. They were cheering them on because they knew the battle had taken place. They didn't realise it was still going on, and many of the Grimsby Chums who were killed had been lying there for several days. So that was a very, very sad piece of history.
It depended because different casualties were taken at different times, but when somebody was shot on the front line, they might lie in a shell hole for days, and it could be 2, 3, 4 days before somebody found them and they were shipped back.
That new Chums battalion would get decimated again, and in a subsequent battle they lost another 20 odd men a few days later when they moved up the line to Byzantine-le-Petit, and some more men were killed there, so they would have to be replaced by, and so it went on. So by the end of the war, very few of the original Chums would be left in the battalion.
So many of the Chums were shipped at different times to different locations. Initially, the first injured were asked to move back towards Albert, where there was a sort of field hospital.
I think that was it 57,000 killed on that day? Some horrific figure. It's amazing to actually get a body back. There's the fact that he was injured and they were able to get him back off the field and get him into Rouen Hospital. It was amazing enough.
Come on, Mr. Officer.
Yes, it was one of the most extraordinary things to the family history comes down, that when he was injured, machine gunned, take to Rouen Hospital. Between the 1st and the 23rd of July when he died, my grandparents actually went and saw him in hospital.
We have come all the way from Grimsby. How is he today?
His injuries are very serious. He's comfortable, he's clean, we've prayed for him. Would you?
Hello, John.
Mr. Mr. Bellamy, he wanted you to have these. Just in case. I'll leave you to say your goodbyes.
And Charlie, all the family sends their love, they're thinking about you. Get home soon to us. Well done, lads. Everybody knows about the Chums in Grimsby. Very proud of you. Come home soon. You might think that's fairly an unlikely story, except that for the rest of her life, my grandmother had this little glass container in her side cabinet with machine gun bullets in, and she wouldn't have had those unless she'd been where they'd been taken out in Rouen Hospital, would they?
I knew that he'd been shot in the Battle of the Somme. I knew that, and to all intents and purposes that ended his career in the army.
Mr. Tedder, sir, come on. You must try to stay as still as you can, sir. It won't be long now. Nearly done, Mr. Tedder. Nearly done, sir.
Show some respect. Stop whistling that bloody song. You know Captain Bellamy didn't like it. Captain Bellamy, do you want me to call a nurse? Are you alright, sir?
Nurse! Nurse!
He'll be alright. It'll take more than a few bullets to polish off our captain.
You think he can hear us?
Of course he can. Just needs a bit of good old-fashioned TLC. Mark my words, Harry. The nurses in this place certainly know how to see to that. Trust me. He'll be fine. This time next week he'll be back in Brown's, showing off all his scars to the pretty girls and Mr. and Mrs. Brown. Walking down the seafront, head held higher than ever.
Walking?
Well, maybe not walking exactly.
Rope. That's what he said he wanted to get into. When this war was over, he wanted to get into rope.
And that's what he'll do. Isn't that right, Captain? I'm going to go back home to Grimsby, run that rope factory and do A Company proud. He's got an Indian motorcycle at home, ladies. You should see him on it. It's a right handsome chap, he does. I think I'm going to get myself one when I get back to Grimsby.
When I get back to Grimsby, I'm going to open up my own shop. And once this leg gets better, I'm going to go dancing.
Hey, company, move out.
To those I love. In a few hours' time, I shall be on my way to carry out whatever is my lot. We are going through a terrible strife, and I hope to be one of the fortunate ones to return to those I love so well. If it is not God's will that I return to you all will all know that I tried to do my duty as a man. and willingly do so for you all at home. I may not appear to be demonstrative in my feelings towards you at home, but you little know me. I fully appreciate all that you all have done for me, and thank you. Goodbye, and may God bless you all. Amen. I have few worldly belongings. Perhaps you are disappointed, but army life is expensive. Cox & Co. 16 Charing Cross Street are my bankers, and there is my insurance with Limited Kingdom Assurance Company. Give my Indian or its proceeds to my good friend Billy Lawton. £50 to the YMCA. The remainder to father if he thinks things are bad owing to the war. But if not, equally to mother, father, Clem, Gertie, Addie, Florrie, Gladys and Roland. Charles Henry Bellamy, Captain, 10th Lincolnshire Regiment. To be handed to me when I return. If not, it is to be opened by father. Charlie.
Time to go home, Harry. I can almost smell the docks.
Last of the chums, eh? Some reward.
Chin up. What will your Hilda say?
I can't tell her. I can never tell her. Everything we saw, everyone we lost, I'll show her mercy. It never happened. None of it. It was all just some wretched nightmare never to be relived. We forget. We move on. We live ordinary lives.
Ordinary lives, eh?
I'm going to miss Captain Bellamy.
And his never-ending supply of woodbines. When I get back home, I'm going to ride my motorcycle just like Captain Bellamy rode his.
He was a brave captain. He was always looking out for us chums.
He did.
Rest in peace, Captain Bellamy. You did A Company proud.
To the rest of you chums who died in battle, Grimsby will never forget the sacrifice you made.
Later in July and August, they were in action on the Somme again. In 1917, they were at Arras, and they suffered a lot of casualties at the chemical works at Roux, near Arras.
It was the group of them that held off in the village in the Somme, in France, and that's where he got his military medal. But what he did, we don't know, because he never talked about it.
Arras was a major battle on April the 9th, 1917. Later in 1917 they came back to the Somme, a village called Hargicourt, in August 1917. They were up at Passchendaele in October 1917. They were in Armentières in 1918 when the Germans launched their major offensive in March, and the chums lost a lot of men then. So they lost men throughout the war.
Back in about 1917, they had to provide 150 men, I think it was, for training purposes, to go and train the Americans who'd eventually... The Chums Battalion was actually a service battalion. It was called the 10th Service Battalion of the Lincolnshire Regiment. Service battalions were just there for the duration. Once the war was over, they weren't needed, so they just disbanded and sent back.
I have to say I feel very privileged to have met those men, and I spent some marvellous hours just talking. They formed the Old Comrades Association for the 10th and 11th Battalions of the Lincolnshire Regiment, the Chums Battalions, in 1919. And the marvellous thing about that association was that it lasted until 1977.
They used to meet up at various hotels around about.
And they attended a church service at St James Church in Grimsby. And the Wakefield men came over for those services. They were very proud at having served their king and country. And I remember one chap, Sergeant Cammack, said to me that his brother was blown to pieces a few yards away from where he was, where they went over the top together, and he was very badly injured on the right shoulder. And he said to me, despite everything that happened, I'm glad I went. I wouldn't have wanted to have stayed at home. And those were the type of people that you were dealing with. They didn't want to let their mates down, and so they got over the top, went over the top, faced those hailstones of bullets. A humbling experience to speak to them.
And my father joined up in 1939, he joined up for 4 years and was stationed with the Sherwood Foresters, the Leicestershire Regiment. But I think a lot of the chums went along the same. So they came back to Grimsby and formed the Pioneers, the chums, and went to Waltham Wireless Station. And I didn't know my dad had been a pioneer until his funeral. And these chappies all sat at the front of the crematorium, just went after the funeral, and when we looked at the flowers, they were from the Pioneers.
The great thing about the chums is not only did they go through the First World War, but they volunteered for service in the Second World War as part of a national defence company, which was separate to the Home Guard. And they were allocated to guard duties on Immingham Docks, Grimsby Docks, airfields and strategic targets like the radar facility up at Stenigot on the Lincolnshire Wolds.
In World War II, he was working in Grimsby, working his way up in the post office, and he was seconded by the War Office and given a commission to go to Leeds, where he became the adjutant and quartermaster of the 19th Battalion of the GPO Home Guard. He was awarded the MBE upon retirement for services for work in the post office.
Lieutenant Easton, he wasn't an officer at first. He was a corporal in the first few months of his service, but his family ran quite a famous estate agency in Grimsby. The Bellamy's had garages, and there was all sorts of other people from different trades and businesses around the town. The Holderoyds had a haberdashery shop. It went on for years after the war, because one of the brothers survived. He continued the family business.
January 1969, he got a job as a lollipop man, and he started that about January the 25th, and he worked till Friday the 7th of February, and he died on the 8th, morning of the 8th. But he did say whenever any of his friends died over the years, and they died like that was the way he wanted to go. So he got his wish.
It's such a long time ago that really you've nearly forgotten, apart from the photographs and the sword we've got. You come across them occasionally and think of him. And
my generation don't know much about the First World War, and that's sad to say. I think a lot of it was my mother and my father's generation lived through 2 world wars, and war wasn't the thing they wanted to talk about.
You can only have pride in the sacrifice that these people did. It was a pretty horrific situation, and one that, let's hope, is never repeated.